He laughed while he signed away 10 years of my life. That's the first thing you need to know about my husband. The sound of his own laughter meant more to him than the sound of mine ever had. But stick with me because 40 minutes later, that laugh would die in his throat the second a judge started reading numbers he never knew existed. Before I get into the part where his whole world came apart on the record in open court, tell me in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from tonight. My name is Renee. I'm 33 years old, and on the coldest morning of my life, I sat at a courtroom table with my hands folded so tightly my knuckles had gone white, because it was the only way I could keep them from shaking. The room itself felt refrigerated. I remember thinking that the air conditioning must have been broken, cranked to some Arctic setting nobody asked for, until I realized the chill wasn't coming from the vents at all. It was coming from inside me. Across the aisle, my soon-to-be ex-husband Marcus radiated heat. Actual physical warmth, like a man basking in his own personal sunrise. He kept leaning toward his attorney, a sharp-jawed shark of a man in a suit that cost more than my first car, and whispering something that made them both huff out these quiet, superior little laughs. Not laughs of joy. Laughs of conquest. Laughs that were the final punctuation mark on a decade I'd poured myself into. At one point he caught me watching him, and his mouth curled into that smirk. God, I knew that smirk. I'd been on the receiving end of it for years. It was equal parts pity and triumph, and it said everything without a single word. Poor thing. What is she going to do without me? I looked away. I found the flag standing beside the judge's bench and I fixed my eyes on it like it was the only solid thing left in the universe. That morning my attorney, a soft-spoken, silver-haired man named Harold Kessler, had gripped my shoulder in the hallway and told me exactly one thing. Whatever happens in there, Renee, don't let him see you flinch. Your composure is the only weapon you're bringing into this room. So I held the line. I listened to Marcus's lawyer stand and drone on in that syrupy legal cadence, laying out the terms of their oh-so-generous settlement, like they were doing me some enormous favor. Strip it of the jargon and here's what it actually said. Here are your scraps. Enough for a small apartment. Enough to disappear quietly and not make a scene. I was being decommissioned like outdated hardware, and they wanted it on record that Marcus had been merciful about it. Humiliation has a weight to it. I felt it settle over my shoulders like a wet coat, and still I didn't move. I waited. I breathed through it. I waited for the shark to finish and sit back down. Then it was our turn. Harold rose slowly. No fire, no dramatics. Just the unhurried gravity of a man who's been doing this for 30 years, and has never once needed to raise his voice to win. He didn't argue a single line of their offer. Instead, he looked straight at the judge and said, calm as still water. Your Honor, we accept the proposed division of assets as written. However, this morning we filed an amended financial disclosure on behalf of my client. He set a document on the table. Thick. Spiral-bound. 3 inches easy. A bailiff was already carrying a copy across the room to Marcus's attorney. I watched Marcus's smirk twitch. Just barely. His forehead creased in confusion because in his mind, there was nothing left to disclose. My financial life had always just been a satellite orbiting his. There was no unexplored territory. No surprises. Not from me. And as I watched his lawyer crack open that folder, his easy posture stiffening by the second, my mind slipped backward. The frozen courtroom melted away, and suddenly I wasn't sitting at a table anymore. I was standing in a garage. That garage was the first office of what would eventually become Marcus's company, Vantage Systems. It smelled permanently like motor oil and wet concrete, and we rented it from a landlord who complained every single month about the noise. 1 desk, 2 folding chairs, a whiteboard covered in scribbles that looked less like a business plan, and more like the manifesto of a man on the edge. That whiteboard was mine. Marcus was the engineer, brilliant with code, hopeless with people. I was the one who figured out what real human beings would actually do with the thing he'd built. I remember the night everything changed. He'd hit a wall. Powerful software, zero direction. He was slumped in his folding chair, pale, defeated. It's too complicated, Ren, he muttered. Nobody's going to get it. I hadn't slept in 2 days. I'd been buried in competitor research, scrolling through forums at 3 a.m., hunting for the gap in the market that nobody else had spotted yet. I grabbed the marker off the tray and started drawing. You're thinking like an engineer, I told him. Stop trying to sell people the engine. Build them a car to put it in. And then I mapped it out, right there on that whiteboard, the interface, the pricing tiers, a subscription model aimed at small businesses instead of giant corporations nobody could afford to court. An entire go-to-market strategy, born in one sleepless night, drawn in dry erase marker. He stared at that board for a full minute without saying a word. Then he looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since our first date. Renee, he whispered. You're a genius. 1 year later, in a real boardroom in front of men in $1,000 suits, he stood up and presented my exact strategy. My handwriting on that whiteboard had become a slick, polished slide deck. And he never said my name. Not once. When an investor asked where the marketing angle came from, Marcus just smiled that charming, camera-ready smile and said, "Ideas like that just find you sometimes." I was sitting in the back row. It felt like getting the wind knocked out of me. But I smiled. I clapped along with everyone else. I told myself it didn't matter because his win was our win. That's the lie I told myself for years. And every year I told it a little quieter because I believed it a little less. I ran the operations, payroll, HR, the accounting nightmares nobody else wanted to touch. I decorated the new offices when we finally left the garage behind. I planned every launch party, every holiday dinner. I became the invisible scaffolding holding up his rising throne, and the higher that throne climbed, the smaller I got. The dinner parties were the worst of it. Marcus loved holding court, spinning stories for a table full of admiring tech guys who hung on his every word. I was expected to sit there, smile and stay quiet. And if anyone ever made the mistake of asking what I did, what I was interested in, he'd cut me off before I could answer. "Oh, Renee's got her little creative projects," he'd say, patting my hand like I was a child who'd drawn something cute on the fridge. "Keeps her busy." Those little projects were my design sketches. The thing I did in secret late at night after he'd fallen asleep. The only piece of me that was still fully, completely mine. Every dismissive comment was a log thrown onto a fire that had been quietly building inside me for years. I didn't know it yet, but I was one spark away from a wildfire. The spark came through a door that wasn't quite shut. I was hauling in groceries one evening when I heard Marcus on the phone in his office, the door left open just a crack. I recognized the voice on the other end immediately. A major investor, the kind of man whose name people said in hushed, reverent tones at dinner parties. "And what about your wife?" the investor asked. "What's her role in all this?" I froze in the hallway, arms full of paper bags, my heart suddenly pounding in my ears. I held my breath, waiting for him to say something, anything, that acknowledged the 10 years I'd given this thing we built together. Marcus laughed. Light. Dismissive. Easy. "Renee? She's great. My rock. Keeps the home fires burning so I can focus on the big picture. Honestly, she's just around. Just around." The bag slipped out of my hands. A carton of eggs hit the floor and shattered, but I didn't even hear it. All I could hear was those two words, echoing through some vast, sudden emptiness that had opened up right in the center of my chest. That was the moment the dam broke. 10 years of swallowed frustration, of silent sacrifice, of biting my tongue until it bled, all came surging up at once in this silent, seething tidal wave. I didn't confront him. What was the point? He wouldn't even understand what he'd done wrong. He genuinely believed just around was a compliment. So instead that night, once he was asleep, I called my best friend from design school, Priya, a textile buyer in Chicago now, and the only person alive who knew exactly what I'd given up to stand quietly behind Marcus's success. "He called me a rock tonight, Priya," I whispered into the phone, hiding in the walk-in closet so he wouldn't hear me through the wall. Said I was just around. There was a pause. City traffic hummed faintly on her end of the line. "Okay," she said finally, her voice going all business. "So what are you going to do about it? Keep haunting your own house like a ghost? Or actually start living in it? What does that even mean?" "It means you're the most talented designer I've ever met, Renee. You have an eye people would kill for. He thinks that's a hobby. So show him exactly what a hobby can build." Something ignited in me right then. Not hope exactly. Something colder, sharper, resolve. The next day my second life began. I drained a chunk of my own savings and rented a tiny windowless studio above a dry cleaner in the arts district. I told Marcus I'd signed up for a pottery class. "That's nice, honey," he said, eyes glued to his phone. His total lack of interest became my perfect cover. I called it Renero, my initials twisted into something that felt like mine. For the next 18 months I lived a double life with the precision of a spy. I was the smiling, agreeable wife until 9 o'clock every night. Then I slipped out, drove across town, and worked in that studio until sunrise. It was brutal. I made mistakes that nearly wrecked me. I ordered 100 yards of what was supposed to be raw silk from an overseas supplier, and it arrived feeling like cheap costume fabric. I ate that loss and it hurt. I tried building my own e-commerce site from scratch, nearly hurled my laptop across the room more than once, before I finally caved and hired an actual developer. There was one heart-stopping night when an invoice for a shipment of French lace got mailed straight to our house. I saw the envelope in the pile of mail on the counter, and my stomach dropped through the floor. I snatched it up and stuffed it in my bag seconds before Marcus walked through the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get my key in the studio lock the next morning. But there were wins too. Priya connected me with better suppliers and gave me the kind of brutal, unsentimental feedback only a real friend can give. "The cut's incredible," she told me once over video call. "But this fabric looks like a costume. It's cheapening the whole design. Find something better." So I did. Then came the first sale from a total stranger. I was slumped over my desk at 2 a.m. when my phone buzzed with an order confirmation. Someone in Nebraska had bought one of my dresses. I stared at that notification and cried actual tears of joy for the first time in years. From there it built slowly, then all at once. A mid-tier fashion blogger found the site, bought a piece, wore it, posted about it. That post got 1,000 likes. Then 10,000. My little website crashed under the traffic. Orders poured in faster than I could fulfill them. And Marcus noticed absolutely none of it. He was too busy admiring his own reflection to notice the empire quietly rising 3 miles away, built entirely out of his blind spot. The final betrayal happened on a rainy Wednesday. Our 11th anniversary. I know how foolish that sounds now. But some small, stubborn, hopeful part of me thought the day deserved an effort. I picked up his favorite pastries and drove to his office to surprise him. The surprise ended up being mine. Stepping off the elevator, I saw him standing near the reception desk with a woman. Young, blonde, visibly, unmistakably pregnant. His hand rested casually on the small of her back like it belonged there. They were laughing together, easy and intimate, the exact way we used to laugh before I became furniture in his life. He looked up and saw me. The laughter died instantly in his throat. His face drained of color. The woman glanced between us, her smile faltering. "Marcus? Who's this?" I braced myself for a lie. His sister. A coworker. Anything. What he actually said was so much worse. He gave her back another reassuring pat, looked me dead in the eyes with a coldness I'd never seen from him before, and said, "It's fine, babe. This is Renee. Old acquaintance. Her husband left her a while back. I've just been helping her get back on her feet." He didn't just erase our marriage. He rewrote it in real time, into a pathetic little charity story where he played the hero and I played the discarded, helpless afterthought. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe for a second. I just looked at his hand on her back, and something inside me went completely terrifyingly calm. The calm you find at the dead center of a hurricane. I turned around, walked back to that elevator and pressed the button. When the doors opened downstairs, I stepped out, hailed a cab and gave the driver 2 words. "Lawyer's office." The months that followed were a strange, tense dance. Marcus's legal team came out swinging, painting me in every filing as a bitter, opportunistic wife hunting for an undeserved payday. My side stayed quiet, compliant. We agreed to nearly everything they proposed. And the whole time, the truth about Renner Rose sat like a ticking clock in my briefcase. The day before our final hearing, everything changed. A courier delivered a formal written offer from one of the largest fashion conglomerates in Europe. They'd been quietly watching my company grow for months, and they wanted to acquire it outright. The number they offered was so large I actually laughed out loud the first time I read it. That wasn't a number for somebody's little side hustle. That was a number for an empire. Harold could barely sit still. "This is it, Renee. This is the cannonball that sinks his battleship. We countersue for emotional distress, for years of unpaid contribution to his business, intellectual property, all of it. We could walk away with everything." I sat with that offer in my hands for a long moment. I let myself picture it. The look on Marcus's face, the total collapse. The revenge served exactly the way I used to fantasize about it during those long silent car rides home from his office parties. And then the thought left a sour, bitter taste in my mouth. "No," I said, surprising even myself. "I don't want to be the woman who burned his company down. I want to be the woman who built her own from nothing. We stick to the settlement exactly as it stands. I don't want an extra dollar from him. I just want the truth on the record." Harold studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, Renee. The truth it is." The night before court, I drove back to that first windowless studio one last time. I was closing on a much bigger space the following month, but I needed to stand in that room one more time before I let it go. I ran my hand along the wall where I'd pinned that very first order confirmation from Nebraska. This was the room where the version of me who apologized for existing had quietly died, and the version who built something real had been born. I stood there for a long time. Then I turned off the light and walked out ready. Which brings us back to that freezing courtroom, and the moment everything finally cracked open. The bailiff handed Marcus's lawyer that thick spiral-bound disclosure. I watched him flip through the first few pages, incorporation paperwork, tax filings, with a bored, half-interested expression. Then he stopped turning pages so casually. His eyes narrowed. He flipped again. And again. His knuckles went white around the edges of the document. He looked up at Harold with his mouth slightly open, like he'd just seen something impossible. He leaned over and shoved the folder in front of Marcus, whispering something urgent I couldn't hear. I didn't need to hear it. I just watched my husband's face. I watched the man who thought my entire world fit comfortably inside his shadow start scanning the first page. A frown. He turned it. The frown deepened. His hands started moving faster, jerkier, flipping through sales reports, growth charts, profit and loss statements that told the story of 18 months he knew absolutely nothing about. And then he reached the very last page. A copy of the acquisition offer. The number circled in red ink by Harold's own pen. Marcus's entire body went rigid. What little color remained in his face drained away, leaving him almost gray. His jaw, set in that smug line all morning, went completely slack. He stared at that circled number. Then his head snapped up and his eyes locked onto mine across the room. I will never forget that look for as long as I live. It wasn't just shock. It was total system failure, the exact look of a man whose entire understanding of his own life had just collapsed in on itself in real time. The woman he'd dismissed, sidelined, and quietly erased for a decade wasn't some fragile dependent waiting to be rescued. She was a titan he'd never once bothered to actually see. The courtroom went dead silent. You could have heard a single pin drop on that cheap industrial carpet. The judge, a sharp woman in her 60s who missed absolutely nothing, glanced at Marcus's ashen face, then at his lawyer's stricken expression, then at my own quiet, steady calm. It appears, she said dryly, that we may need a short recess. 15 minutes. The gavel cracked down like a gunshot, and it was the starting gun for the rest of my life. I walked out into the hallway and headed for the water fountain. My legs a little unsteady but my mind completely clear. The storm had finally passed through me and out the other side. Marcus caught up fast, grabbing my elbow. His hand felt clammy through my sleeve. Renee. His voice came out cracked, unrecognizable. What the hell was that? Renner Row? That number? You told me you were taking a pottery class. I looked down at his hand on my arm until he let go. I was busy, Marcus. Busy. His voice climbed, sharp enough to turn heads in the corridor. We need to fix this. Retract the filing. We can work something out here. He was already scrambling to regain his footing, the old gears of persuasion grinding back to life behind his eyes. He dropped his voice, tried to sound reasonable. Think about the story here. Tech founder and fashion mogul, building an empire together. We merge everything. Think what we could build. He was looking at me with a hunger I recognized instantly, the exact hunger he'd once had for my whiteboard strategy, for my ideas, for my labor. Now it was pointed at my company. There is no we, I said, and my voice came out steady as ice water. He shifted tactics immediately, the wheedling collapsing into something colder. Don't get emotional about this, Renee. I know you're upset about the other thing. I get it, but don't let that cloud good business sense. This is an opportunity. For you, you mean, I said. An opportunity to tell everyone how your guidance helped your little wife turn her hobby into a real business? His face flushed. He knew exactly what I just handed him back. He tried one final move, the wounded, remorseful husband. His whole posture softened. Ren, I miss us. The way things used to be. I made a mistake. I was under so much pressure. But I never stopped loving you. It was the most transparent, hollow thing I'd ever heard him say. And it landed like the final nail sealing a coffin shut. I stepped forward close enough that he had to take a step back. Let me be very clear, I said low and even. You don't miss us. You miss the woman who proofread your investor emails at 2 a.m. You miss the woman who gave up her own dreams so you could chase yours in peace. You miss the woman who was just around to keep your ego fed and your calendar organized. I let that sit for a second. That woman's gone, Marcus. She isn't coming back. Now if you'll excuse me, I have a future to get to. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the middle of that marble hallway. A king surveying the ruins of a kingdom he never realized had been built on sand the whole time. 1 year later, I was standing in a glass-walled boardroom in Milan, the skyline glittering behind me through floor-to-ceiling windows. I was sitting across from the executive team of the very conglomerate that had once tried to buy me out entirely. Except this time, after weeks of relentless negotiation over every clause protecting my creative control, we'd signed something different. A genuine partnership. They got access to my brand and my design language. I got their global infrastructure and distribution. A deal between equals, not a sale. I'd become fluent somewhere along the way in a language I never thought I'd need: contracts, valuations, equity structures. The language of somebody who builds things, not somebody who just supports the person building them. Right after the signing, my phone buzzed with a news alert carrying Marcus's name. A major business outlet had just run a feature on him, and the headline alone told me everything. It called out, in plain language, how the CEO of Vantage Systems had spent years completely overlooking a rising empire sitting quietly in his own home. The piece wasn't really about our divorce at all. It was a takedown of his leadership, his blind spots, his arrogance, and it detailed how several senior women at his company had resigned in the months since the story broke, citing exactly the kind of culture you'd expect from a man who once called his own wife just around. His company wasn't collapsing, but his name had become a punchline in rooms he used to command. I read the headline once, then I closed the notification and didn't open the article. His story wasn't mine to carry anymore. I felt something settle in me that evening, quiet, steady, entirely mine. My victory was never going to be measured by his downfall. It lived somewhere else entirely. In the fact that I'd built something real on my own terms, out of nothing but a windowless room and 18 months of stolen nights. Later that night, Priya and I toasted with champagne on a rooftop bar. The city spread out below us like scattered light. To Renner Row, she said, raising her glass. No, I said, clinking mine against hers. To Renee. We smiled at each other in the cool night air, and standing there, I finally understood the whole shape of it. All the humiliation, all the years of shrinking myself smaller and smaller to fit someone else's idea of who I should be, none of it had been punishment. It had been a furnace. It burned away the version of me who apologized for taking up space, and what walked out the other side was someone I actually recognized. I had to disappear completely in his eyes before I could finally write my own name in the world. My phone buzzed one more time. A new order notification from the site. Another woman somewhere out there, about to put on something I designed with my own hands. I opened my sketchbook. Blank page. Endless possibility. And with a steady hand I started drawing again. So that's my story. It was a long, difficult road, and I'm endlessly grateful to be standing where I am today. It makes me think a lot about the turning points scattered through all of our lives, the small moments that quietly split everything into before and after. So tell me, has there ever been a moment, a crisis, a heartbreak, that forced you to find a strength you didn't know you had? I'd genuinely love to read your stories in the comments below. And if any part of this journey resonated with you, drop a like on this video and consider subscribing to the channel. Means more than you know. Thank you so much for being here with me.